So good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming. My name is Rhoda Shermer, and as most of you know, I'm the president of the Network for Responsible Public Policy. Oh, wow. So I welcome you. We have a great program for you tonight. But before we get started, I want to thank the people who make this program possible, and that's Fairleigh Dickinson University. They're fabulous. The League of Women Voters of Northern Valley, and the League of Women Voters of Fairlawn. Can't do these programs without their support, so that's great. So tonight we're going to have a discussion with three really good experts on political strategy. They will help us take apart the 2018 midterm elections. And I hope you'll be thinking of a lot of questions to ask them, because it's going to be a very informal kind of discussion. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker, and that will be Alan Steinberg. Now, Alan Steinberg is a Republican, but not for Trump. Yeah. And he was the regional administrator for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Region 2 from 2005 to 2009 in the administration of former President George W. Bush. And he has a very strong record of implementing a considerable list of important environmental projects. Prior to that, Alan has a wide range of interests and activities, including serving as a faculty in the Political Science Department of Monmouth University. He's co-authored articles on the prospect of Arab-Israeli peace, serves as a guest commentator for a variety of news programs, and is the author of American Jewry and Conservative Politics, A New Direction. And more recently, he's a regular columnist for Insider New Jersey. So he will be our first member of the panel. Second will be Brendan Gill. And Brendan Gill is a Democrat. And he has been referred to as one of our region's most influential and effective political strategies. And I can understand why, because he's had successfully managed the campaigns of Phil Murphy, our current governor, Cory Booker, and several other very important Democratic elected officials. So Brendan also serves as president of the Essex County Board of Chosen Freeholders. He's the vice president of the New Jersey Association of Counties and chair of the Montclair Democratic Party. And you probably have seen Brendan. He's a regular guest and commentator on numerous TV shows and programs, including NJTV's Political Roundtable and News 12 New Jersey. And third, and I thank Fernando Alonso, who has stepped up so gracefully, replacing Pat Schuber. Fernando Alonso is a Republican. He's a lawyer and has been on the faculty here at FDU since 2003. He developed the Latino Promise Program and the Hispanics Achieving College Education Recognition Program. He has spent the last 23 years promoting educational, cultural, and political causes in the Hispanic community and mentored numerous Hispanic political candidates. He has been a Republican candidate for Congress and was appointed by Christy Whitman to the Banking and Insurance Transition Team. He has served in the New Jersey State Assembly and the Senate. Fernando is the current chair of the Bergen County Hispanic Republican Association and worked on the Mark Rubio presidential campaign in New Jersey. Fernando is recognized as one of the top Hispanic leaders in New Jersey. So that's our panel, and we'll start with Alan.
Thank you very much, Rhoda. And I thank you because I owe a lot to Bergen County. One of the positions that really benefited my life was that during the administration of Christy Whitman, I served as the executive director of the New Jersey Meadowlands Commission. There I learned about intensively dealing with land use, environmental issues. In fact, my environmental interest was stimulated there, and that's why I went on to become the administrator of Region 2 EPA. And I really engaged with the people of Bergen County. It's a wonderful county, and it's a county that you really saw development and environmental awareness, and I thank Bergen County. An event happened in my life about 2 weeks ago. I want to talk about that because it puts a perspective on everything. I'm a political junkie, and this year, if you're a political junkie, you were on overload. I mean, every morning I get up to Morning Joe. I felt like a parody of myself. Then I would watch Stephanie Ruhle, and then Hallie Jackson, and I was going crazy all year from these shows and reading around the clock. And I'm a sports fan, and I have never watched less sports in my life than I watched this year. It's been unbelievable. It's been fascinating. A lot was at stake this year. And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks ago, something happened in my life. It took me, I'm still not over it completely. I grew up in Squirrel Hill, Pittsburgh. And I've got to tell you, when your roots are in Squirrel Hill, they're part of you every day of your life. I grew up in a very traditional Jewish home. My grandfather was the leading kosher butcher of Squirrel Hill. My parents married a block away from the Tree of Life Synagogue in Beth Shalom congregation. I was born at McGee Hospital in Pittsburgh. I remember the Pirates winning in 1960, and the day they won, it was a Jewish holiday that Shemini Atzeres said not everybody observes. That day there was a record number of kids taking off from school to see the 7th game of the World Series when Bill Mazeroski hit his home run. I now live in a part of the country I love the most. My kids are in New York City and Manhattan. I live in Highland Park. I love it here, but Squirrel Hill was the one place I loved dearly, from my childhood. And every Sunday, my father would take me to Squirrel Hill and give me like a tour of where he grew up. He was a student at Taylor Alderdice High School. He was in the choir. And when this happened on Saturday afternoon, I observe the Sabbath very strictly now, and my son and my sister got hold of each other. They said, your dad's going to be in bad shape when he finds out about that. And I was. I mean, I spent a whole week. Max Pizarro, the editor of Insider NJ, for whom I write, wonderful person. I said, Max, I know this has nothing to do with New Jersey politics, but I'd like to write an article because my readers are familiar with me. And I wrote an article. It was like I was crying every 15 minutes as I was writing it. And I tried after a week of this. I was watching places on TV I was familiar with. It was frightening because a lot of what's going on here now, the growth of white nationalism, that I'm not going to try to attribute the person who pulled the trigger to any politician. I don't want to get into that, but white nationalism is a cancer on America right now. And because of my interest in politics, I can't get that out of my mind because this hit me where I live. And then towards the end of last week, there was an article in the Washington Post about a woman, Jean Rosenthal. She's married to my father's first cousin, Meyer Rosenthal. My grandfather, Archie Steinberg, brought Meyer Rosenthal's mother to America from Brzeżan, Poland. So all this stuff is hitting me with a wallop every day. I can't, it was an experience I could have done without, but nevertheless, and I learned a lot of life lessons through this. And it affected my son too, because I kept talking about this with him when he was growing up. But just to get my mind off things, I started thinking of things like the Pirates, how lousy the Steelers were when I was growing up, things like that. And then I remembered my first midterm election, and it was in 1958. I was interested in politics at a ridiculously early age. In 1958, in Pennsylvania, there were two major developments. In the governor's race, David L. Lawrence, the mayor of Pittsburgh, was elected as the governor. And he served until 1963 when Bill Scranton became the Republican governor. And the other thing that happened was that Hugh Scott, a Republican, was elected to the United States Senate. Both these were historical developments. David L. Lawrence at the convention in 1960, it was not clear who was going to be the nominee, although John F. Kennedy was in the lead. But Adlai Stevenson was very much, he wasn't on his heels in terms of delegates, but there were a number of undecided delegates who were ready to go with Adlai. I remember my mother, rest her soul, loved Adlai Stevenson. Years later, I told her he wasn't so terrific, I could never persuade her otherwise. Okay, but Adlai Stevenson was, a number of the major delegations were thinking of going with Adlai. And then on the Monday of the convention, David L. Lawrence stood up and he announced that in Pennsylvania, 60 of the 80 delegates would go for John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and that did it. That made him the President of the United States. And had David Lawrence not been elected governor, JFK may have never become president. The other thing was that Hugh Scott, who was elected as the senator, a Republican, in 1974, he was the person who went to the White House and told Richard Nixon, hey, it's all over for you. You've got to resign, you've got to step down. So you never know what's going to result from a midterm election, but that was my first midterm, and it struck me as I was thinking of past memories in Squirrel Hill growing up in western Pennsylvania. You won't know what will result. I'll make my observations. I'd rather take questions, but I'll make a few observations on the midterm without getting into my warm and tender feelings about Donald Trump. You can read all about my columns where I wrote a column last Sunday that I was told by Enrique Lavin, the outside editor, I'm not saying this to brag, of the Star Ledger. I write one column a month for them. Enrique said that they had more reaction to this article than any article written by an outside columnist all year. So I felt, geez, I always wanted to set some kind of record. He said, oh yeah, he said that was a monster column. But anyway, so my feelings are all in there, and you can get it from last Sunday's Star Ledger. And I wrote a column today on what I consider to be the after effects of the midterms. But I'll just say a few things. First of all, I think the Republican Party in the Northeast is moribund. It really is in a lot of ways. I'm not saying it's finished forever, but what you saw in this election, there's been a lot of talk about the Trump base. As a reaction to Trump for all the things he stands for, and I won't get into my usual attack on him, although if you talk to me later, I can spew fire and brimstone about him. But you have a new coalition. And this coalition is of women voters who find Trump to be anathema. They're not so concerned about whether the economy is good or not. They want to be treated with respect. And this is a pure misogynist you're dealing with here. I had to say something. You know, the reaction of women voters, the reaction of white college-educated men, they've gone over to the Democratic Party. What I call the coalition of ethnics, which are basically Asian Americans, African Americans, and Hispanics, they're part of this new coalition. So you have three, I wrote today about the three new gaps: the gender gap, the women are going with the Democrats; the ethnic gap, those three ethnic groups I mentioned have gone with the Democrats; and also the among white men. White men who are college educated have gone with the Democrats. This is a powerful coalition. And in New Jersey, you have more of a presence of these groups than ever before. And it's resulted consequently in the suburbs where most of a lot of the ethnics live in the cities, but you know, white men and college-educated women are living in the suburbs. When I was involved as a senior policy advisor on the staff of Chuck Time when he was Speaker of the Assembly, the suburbs were the basis of the Republican Party. The suburbs are gone. The Republicans still could elect a governor in New Jersey if there is dissatisfaction. This governor's lucky he has Brendan Gill as his personal advisor. If he listens to him, he'll probably survive. But if he doesn't, you know, let's say that Phil Murphy falls out of favor, you could have a Republican governor elected with no other Republicans being elected to anything, because in that respect, New Jersey is like Maryland with Larry Hogan as a Republican. They'll never elect U.S. senators there, but you can elect a governor. In Massachusetts, you have Charlie Baker. You can still elect a governor in New Jersey, but there isn't much else you're going to be able to elect. And that's one of the consequences. And Trump is toxic in New Jersey. You know, that's not going to go forward. The other thing I'll tell you from my service in the Bush administration, and then I'll stop talking. I have a tendency to go in verbal overload too. I'm telling you, I don't know this for a fact. Something's going to break soon on the Trump investigations. I'll tell you why I say that. When I was in the Bush administration, nobody had a better reputation than Bob Mueller. Donald Trump is a fool for picking him as an enemy. This is like a fighter going into the ring saying he can beat Muhammad Ali. He's nuts to pick. This man is the most competent attorney. This man is the most ethical attorney. Nobody is going to lay a glove on him. Now, it seems like they're trying to end the Russia probe right now. They're trying to end the obstruction probe. Bob Mueller is 5 steps ahead of everybody else in the world. There is no way that he hasn't anticipated this. I don't know what he's done. Maybe there are some sealed indictments. Maybe there is a contingency plan where, he could get fired and go work for the new Democrat. He'll do whatever he feels serves justice. And the Democrat House would be well advised to hire him if Trump unloads him. But he's 5 steps ahead of everybody. And he has, I have a strong feeling that he has the goods on whatever is going on. I'm not trying to prejudge anything. I have my own suspicions. But don't be surprised within the next, I had long anticipated it would take maybe another year or so. I don't think so anymore. I think Bob Mueller is ahead of the game, and just look out. Something, I don't know this for a fact. I've had a year, I've often made wrong predictions. This year I've been right, even at times I didn't want to be right. But look out, something's going to happen on the investigation. I'm absolutely convinced. And with that, I'll leave it up to my more learned partners up here.
Am I up? Okay. All right. So first of all, I wrote a thank you for having me. It's great to be here, great to be at FDU and to be on this panel. My friend Alan, that's a very tough act to follow for sure. And I appreciate those kind words about my advice over the years to different elected officials, and was mentioned in my bio. Just a little bit about my bio. I have had the opportunity to spend most of my professional career in public service. I'm Jersey born and bred, raised in the People's Republic of Montclair. Now it's affectionately known, and still live there with my family. Graduate of Seton Hall University, and went on to want to get involved, and got involved in campaigns. My dad is a public school teacher in Montclair. Just started his 47th year teaching in the Montclair public schools, and really inspired and through a lot of dinner time conversations the importance of being involved and paying attention and participating in the process. And I chose to do that through the vehicle of working in campaigns, but I think these types of opportunities like tonight are just so important, for people to participate and have debates, and I'm sure we'll have a little bit of one tonight. I also so I've been behind the scenes, most recently managing Governor Murphy's campaign. On this year, I was a consultant for Mikey Sherrill's campaign in District 11, and worked. She was successful. Well, yeah, listen, you gotta. I didn't run that one, but when you win, you take the credit, because I'm sure I take the blame when I've lost. So yeah, that was a great race to work on, and also did some other work on some other statewide initiatives, as well as some independent expenditures. So I've been able, and also finally, in addition to campaign work, also served as the late Senator Lautenberg State Director here in New Jersey. I ran his government office here in New Jersey for 7 years. So I've had experience as a campaign worker and an operative, I guess is that word. I always kind of cringe when they, that campaign operative, it sounds so, sinister, so to speak. But I always say, for me, it's about serving in public service, and we should encourage people. So we got to figure that out. We got to brand that better in some way out, because we got to encourage our young people to participate. So just some brief observations about Tuesday's election, and I'll actually start by disagreeing a little bit with you, Alan, in terms of not so much. I believe in that coalition that you highlighted, which is important, but if you kind of look at the numbers, both in the congressional races, we're down now to one Republican. If Andy Kim is certified as the winner, which it looks like right now he will be. So that will be a pickup of four seats for the Democrats this year in New Jersey, which I would have told you that 2 years ago on election day in the Clinton-Trump presidential election, if you asked any insider or Democratic strategist or Republican strategist for that matter, if there was an opportunity to pick up 4 congressional seats, they would have laughed you out of the room. they would have laughed you out. They would have said it's impossible. They said it can happen. Demographics aren't there. The numbers aren't there. And then that evening, Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. And I don't say that as a partisan matter. I mean, I'm a proud Democrat. I'm not a supporter of Donald Trump, but I say that to say that things can change quickly in politics and in government. I remember actually in 2008 when President Obama was elected for the first time, and Democrats took a supermajority in the Senate. We had control of the House, and Senator Lautenberg looked at me and said, and he believed this, and he said, I think that the Republican Party may be in deep trouble nationally for a generation, and we lost both houses 2 years later. Sure, yeah. So these things can swing, and they swing fast. What is most surprising, though, to me, if looking at the results from Tuesday, is that we saw gains across all demographic groups in New Jersey. So there's really not one particular demographic group that you can say kind of growed their vote share and say, well, that was the reason why these candidates were successful. Donald Trump was the predominant factor in all of the races in New Jersey. Maybe nationally. We didn't do as well nationally as we did here in New Jersey, but there's no question that the Senate race, even though $35 million was spent by the Republican candidate to make that race a referendum on the incumbent senator, that race from the beginning all the way to the end was a referendum on the president. And in fact, I've never seen public polling, and also polling from work for clients where the incumbent was upside down in his favorability numbers, literally by 20 points, where the kind of question was, gets asked, do you like this person or how do you feel about them? And you have an unfavorable feeling about this person. And then the next question is, well, who are you going to vote for? I'm going to vote for that individual. So, and again, that says and shows, and that did not change throughout the entirety of that race. The senator was never able to move his fave to unfave number, but if you saw both in the public and the internal polling, he also never lost ground in the head-to-head. So it shows how these types of elections can be nationalized very easily. We also had, on the Democratic side, had a crop of great candidates. Not just because I had a chance to work with Mikey Sherrill, was an outstanding candidate. Navy veteran, federal prosecutor, mother of four, fantastic speaker, energetic, just an unbelievably talented candidate. So when you combine those two things, we also had tremendous grassroots activism. We had a tremendous candidate, and we had the president. And all those things combined, I think, would show in the numbers, show why we grew our vote margins across many different demographic groups. Second thing that I thought was very interesting in New Jersey, and I hope we continue, is to give Governor Murphy a plug. I did run his campaign, so I'm partial to Governor Murphy. Is that Governor Murphy signed a law which increased the access to vote by mail in this state. And under the law that he signed, he essentially signed a law that said anybody who voted by mail in 2016 was automatically going to be sent a vote by mail ballot in the 2018 race. And what that did is it meant that roughly 530,000 people were sent vote by mail ballots. New Jersey, in terms of its access to the polls and its early voting, is behind many, many states. We are, in some states they only vote by mail. They only do early voting. We're still pretty much in the dark ages in how we conduct elections in New Jersey. Out of the 537,000, roughly 530,000 ballots that were sent out, over 420, as of today, over 420,000 people voted by mail and responded, and in about equal percentages in both Democrats and Republicans. About 70% of the Democrats did return it, and about 70% of the Republicans returned the ballots. So that says to me that that voter access, making it more easier for people to be able to vote, is something that we need to continue to do. It also has potentially real political implications, for for the Democratic Party here in this state, because the bottom line is when more people participate, Democrats do better. that is an indisputable fact, particularly in New Jersey, maybe not in other states, but in New Jersey. So I'm fascinated and looking forward to see kind of what kind of debate that creates over the next year as we continue to try to find ways to improve access to the polls, because I think, again, that will cause more engagement. The other thing that's going on, I think, in New Jersey, and you look at the results on Tuesday, that this is at a more granular level among the Republican candidates, is that certain counties that were reliable to produce pluralities for Republican candidates have changed. The demographics of those counties have changed. We're sitting in one right now. Bergen County was a county that could, at a certain point in time in the state's history, could be counted on to produce 25 to 30,000 vote pluralities, for its Republican candidates. It's now reversed. It's now producing 15 to 20,000 vote pluralities for the Democratic candidates. It doesn't mean that couldn't, again, swing back, but it becomes increasingly difficult both in statewide elections for Republicans to win and for congressional elections. Bergen County is now represented by 2 Democrats in Congress. When I first got involved in politics 20 years ago, that's shocking for me to say, it was represented by 2 Republicans. At the local level in Passaic County, for example, very first campaign I worked on was a congressional race. It was then the Mayor of Patterson, was Bill Pascrell. He was running for Congress the first time. The Passaic County Freeholder Board at that time was 7-0 Republican. There's 7 county freeholders. I'm a county freeholder in Essex. The legislative, if you're not familiar, the legislative body of county government. In Passaic County, that same board now, since 2002, is now 7-0 Democrat. So it shows you the challenges that Republican candidates face, even without having someone like Donald Trump at the top of the ticket. Finally, I will say, though, what was great, I think, about this was to see the grassroots activism and people participate. I mean, that's, it's having run a lot of elections and trying to get people involved for whatever reasons they chose to get involved. My hope is that they continue to stay involved, to be a part of that process. Because the turnout levels in New Jersey since 2008, just the overall turnout levels, we've been on a steady decline. So this is the first year that we've had an increase in voter participation since 2000. Since 2000, the gubernatorial race in presidential in 2008 was the high mark for voter participation, and we bottomed out in 2014, which was a U.S. Senate race where you had Senator Cory Booker running for, which was a re-election, but really his first general election, and the turnout in that race statewide was 30%. So think about that. You were electing a United States senator, and the general turnout was 30%. So that's problematic that's problematic as a general matter, and I don't think it's a partisan matter for our democracy, and for our republic. So one of the silver linings, I believe, that maybe our good president has maybe contributed to.
You said that.
is getting people engaged, and participating. So it'll be interesting to see if that level is matched again in 2020. And I would say, finally, again, I'm not so sure. There was a big blue wave. We had a blue wave in New Jersey. We didn't have a blue wave nationally. We had a blue wave in this state, but we had more of a ripple.
When he's done, I'll take off. I actually disagree with you on that. I think there was a blue wave nationally, because if you look, you increased the number of state houses where you have now a Democrat governor plus 2 Democrat houses. You increased that by 6. That's a lot.
That's true. You picked up
7 governors. And the number of members of the House, 37.
Yes.
That's huge, because that is the large. I went through all the elections. That is the largest gain by an out of power party, where against the president's party. That's the largest gain in a time of peace and relative prosperity. Those big gains are usually in a time of bad economics, bad foreign policy developments. That's a huge gain. And not only that, if you look at that gain in perspective, this was the largest gain that the Democrats have had in post-war history, usually Republicans. So I think you did have, I think you had a wave.
Here's what, this is funny, the Republicans
Yeah, I'm
arguing that we had a
arguing
gain,
against
and the Democrats can argue that we
I'm
didn't.
giving you more credit.
Well, probably true. We lost three governorships, which are very important to our 2020 strategy. So we lost the governorship in Ohio, we lost the governorship in Iowa, and it looks like we're going to lose the governorship in Florida. We lost, maybe not. We're not done yet, but we've had some bad experiences there as a party over the years.
You gained 2 governors.
So,
You gained governors. You lost. Hillary Clinton lost because of 3 states: Pennsylvania,
Michigan.
Wisconsin, and Michigan. Now you have Democrat governors in all 3 states.
This is true. This is true.
I'm sorry.
No, that's great. No, that's, I don't disagree. I think again, for those of us who were looking, both at the public polling and at least a lot of my experience was on the ground here in the state, and you could feel it here in New Jersey. I mean, you could go to Democratic events, and mentioned in my bio that in a volunteer capacity, I'd chair my local town's Democratic Party, and we have an annual event every fall to help get out the vote for candidates. And I tell people we usually kicking and screaming get 120 people to come to the event. And this year we had over 350 people show up. So those are the kind of anecdotal things that you can just see when people are motivated, they're feeling good about what they want to do, and they want to be involved. So.
It's hard to follow this. These guys are really good.
We study hard.
So you actually hit on it another way. I'm just going to say the way Trump will say it. I'll take credit for everybody voting against me. That's how he would look at it. And it's quite interesting because, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, observing him. This is a guy that's so polarizing that it has really, in a way, increased the voters, coming out, which is quite interesting, even though it's historically low. So he, in his own kind of crazy mind, he could say, "No, I did that." So for me, I've been in New Jersey for about 8 years. I'm from New York City. I'm Bronx originally, South Bronx, and then I grew up in Washington Heights. My family's from Cuba. And I was a nice kid going to a Jesuit high school. I don't know if anybody knows Xavier High School. I went there, a great school. And I was very fortunate to go up to Holy Cross up in Massachusetts. I really wasn't involved so much in politics, but about my senior year at Holy Cross in 1979-80, I was getting involved. There was the whole thing with Cuba and the flotilla and Mariel and all that stuff. And, you could hear from your family all the tension and all that stuff. Of course, I didn't want to get involved because of that. I got involved with the Democratic Party. I was, of all people, a Ted Kennedy follower. And why? Yeah, I knew who he was, but there were very pretty girls involved in the campaign. And so I was one of these New York City kids that said, I'm going to come over here and hang out. And I did that. He loses to, if I remember, Carter. I took on Carter. And so now what do? Of course, I heard this guy named Reagan, and I started hearing the thing with Cuba, and that's how I got involved in being what they would call now a Reagan Republican. Coming back to New York, I was in New York for a while, and then we moved into Jersey, and that's how I got involved in New Jersey politics. I ran for actually the funny part, I ran for sheriff. I wanted to run for something. I was at Union City, there's a big building called the Troy Towers. I was actually the president of the association there, and I used a lot of my legal and financial background to help the finances of the building. But we couldn't take care of the taxes. The taxes was this big thing going on. I just was really just annoyed. How do we control this? And I realized you can't control it because it's from the town. So I was looking into how they increased the taxes and what they spent on. And I found out that there was, I don't know, one time it was somewhere around Father's Day where they gave this no-bid contract to a law firm down in South Jersey. There's a fella, I mean, I'm not blaming him, he's, being a lawyer, I'm very happy he got that in a way, but not when I'm paying for it. But Skorinsky, and I actually wrote an article basically saying that's a great Father's Day gift, $600,000 no big contract. I mean, it was crazy. And I got more.
That never happens in Essex County.
Yeah. So, and I got more involved. And of course, one thing led to another. And I ended up saying, I'm going to do something, I'm going to run. Somehow I met Jose Arango. He and Alan and I know Jose Arango, mutual friend. He's, I call him the Cheshire Cat in Hudson County because he's just really an incredible character. You sit down with him and you'd be amazed at the way he will switch things around and all that, make it look just perfect, Anyway, he said, no, you're going to run for sheriff. And I'm saying, wait, you elect sheriffs here? So I said, all right, I'm going to get my name out. So I run for sheriff. I actually challenged that, I forget the guy's name, but he was an elder gentleman. And I challenged him for charity to a shootout, some kind of a marksmanship type of competition. And of course, in the back of my sleeve, I was a national championship rifleman from Xavier High School. So I thought, maybe I get something here, but it didn't happen. From there, I ran for the state senate. That was something that got me involved. I actually got to meet a lot of the other people in the district. And I ran against Bernard Kenny, and I also know Bernard Kenny. And then I got involved running against Menendez's first campaign for re-election. Now, that wasn't, I was doing it on purpose. I was actually trying to prove to Brett Schundler that you need a Hispanic candidate in that district. And so I took on this gentleman, and I forget his name now, but his father was a big Wall Street guy. Brett Schundler, who's a good guy, I got to tell you, was backing him. And on ABC TV that night, they were saying, and I forget the gentleman's name now, he wins the election, the primary. And we're looking at each other saying, wait a minute, we got the numbers here. And of course, about 5 minutes later, they had to retract that, and I won. Of course, I win this primary as a Republican congressional candidate, 35 years old. I'm a lone Republican in a sea of Democrats, And the next thing I know, I've got to meet Menendez. Now, I knew who Menendez was. He was the mayor and all that. And of course, there was no chance of beating him. And then, of course, we moved up. By the way, in the middle of my campaign, and of course, she's not here today, but my wife decided we're going to move to Bergen County. So we ended up moving up to Oradell. And then I stayed kind of quiet for a while. And then I got involved, I think it was in 2011, where I ran for the assembly in the 33rd district. And then in 2013 against Gordon. And so that's my background in running campaigns. And it was, it kept my eyes wide open as to, what it takes to run a campaign and the demographics and the issues involved. And it's not easy being a Republican, even though I knew when they did that redistricting that the 38th district was in play. I caught that immediately. And the reason is kind of funny. My wife was a councilwoman in Oradell. My friends laugh because he goes, she's the Alonso that wins campaigns. You're just. But I told her they're going to call you, and she says you're crazy. She doesn't want to get involved. And they did call her, but she wasn't going to go down to Trenton. And then I kind of talked to the chairman at that point, was you, and I said, well, if you're looking for somebody, I think I could help with the Hispanic vote. And that's how I got involved. And ever since then, I've been involved in helping Bergen County with Hispanic candidates. Sometimes some of my former students come to me, they want to get involved in politics, and they're really Democrats. And I said, well, this is what you got to do. And sometimes I've helped them out because I really do want representation in the Hispanic community. That's really what I want. I would like them to be Republican. I do have some of them, but most of them go on to the Democratic Party. And what I try to teach in my class, which is quite interesting, the Cuban community I always tell them, learn from the Jewish community. The Jewish community has stuck together. They understand the issues for being Jewish and Israel and all that stuff, and they know how to make a politician listen to them. And I said the Cuban community did the same thing, except that the Cuban community, although they were up here in New York mostly Republicans, they didn't have that opportunity, especially in Union City, to go with the Republicans. So what do? They back Menendez. So Menendez is actually brought in by the Cuban business guys that, I knew them all down there. And it's a great story, but they stayed together. So even though they were saying, he's a Democrat, he's one of us. And so what I've done throughout the years is especially, I'll tell you right now, the Dominican community is a growing community. They are learning fast. of how to unify themselves and back a candidate. They're doing that over in Passaic now a lot, and in Patterson. In fact, some of them I have them here at the university, and I'm helping them out. It's a really fascinating thing. Most people don't understand with the Hispanic community. You have the Colombians, Ecuadorians, Dominicans, Peruvians. I mean, it's all different. We speak the same language, but we don't all think the same way. And in fact, and sometimes in my classes, I'll be the devil's advocate. I try to throw things there to see how they stand. They mostly say they're Democrats, but when they start discussing things, they sound like Republicans. And it's quite interesting. They identify that way, but deep inside, with the way they feel about issues, they're very conservative. And I say, well, you sound like a Republican. Don't call me Republican, you know. That's how they identify. So the Republican Party has a problem. They have to, at least up here in New Jersey. Down in Florida, they've done a tremendous job with that. But up here in New Jersey, they have not been able to make them feel as part of the party. Even though we say the Republican Party, we have the same feelings, we have the same principles, you should be with us. It's still not there. It's going to take some time, not only just communicating, but be the real inclusion, getting them involved with the party. That's a problem, because I got to tell you, there's a lot more Hispanics coming into Bergen County and Passaic and places that are not just a lower economic level, but professionals. You know, I always joke around with some of the guys in Oradell. I was one of the first people there. Now I got a bunch of them. I said, you know, you guys are ruining the neighborhood. Come on, you know, joking around with them. But they're all doctors, lawyers, and everything else. And it's quite interesting. They all came from Hudson County in New York City. And, you know, they are on both sides, Republican and Democrat. So, you know, for us, it's a problem of identifying their needs and then trying to make them understand in a way that's palatable to them that we have the same interests. And the Republican Party hasn't done that. I'll tell you why. I think I saw my observations this year, and it's been like that for the last 2 or 3 years, that if you're a good Republican, then you are, you know, an extreme conservative Republican. And it's just not going to work here in New Jersey. I have friends of mine that disagree with me, but it's just not going to work that way. Because you can vote that way. Your problem is you're not going to have enough people voting like you to win an election. So you can stand for all your principles, but if you want to win elections, then you've got to be able to be, I think, in the middle of getting enough votes for you know, whatever it is you're trying to do to make sure people vote for you. And that's a problem. I saw Jay Weber, I've met him. He's an eloquent guy, but extreme conservative fella in the district that he is. And I think they took him out this time, unfortunately, for him. So it's a problem. In Florida, it's different. I got to tell you, when you saw the influx of Puerto Ricans, right, they were supposed to take out Trump in this election, right? Everybody was waiting for that, and it didn't happen, which is quite interesting. That means that, yes, they are identified as Democrats, but enough of them were voting on the Republican side. The Cuban community down in Miami was obviously strong with Trump, because he did a smart thing. I got to tell you, before the election 2016, Trump went to the 2507, my father was part of that brigade, and he made a point with them. He solidified that voting bloc. When I was part of the Marco Rubio campaign, by the way, I do have a shirt I was selling him. Don't blame me. I voted for Marco Rubio. Okay. We were down there.
Get one of those shirts.
I'll get you one.
It's bad when it comes to that.
I could tell you this, that when we went down to help him when he came back to run as a senator again, we brought a contingent of our people down there, paid for everything. We went down and campaigned for him. And we were in that area where it's the Puerto Rican influx, the corridor. And I realized as I was watching that Trump was going to win Florida, because I thought Hillary would be winning that down there. And what you saw was a lot of the silent majority signs, you know, we know, and it was all for Rubio and, of course, Trump. Rubio beat both of them in that election in November of 2016 for Senate. I mean, you know, the numbers. But what it tells you is that the Hispanic community can go both ways. I think as time goes on and they start understanding what's happening, they're not going to be taken for granted as time goes on. I think you'll see that as we go along. They're doing it up in Passaic right now. There's a small group building as you go along. I'll give you an example. Here in Hackensack, We have a former student of mine who got onto the Board of Ed, and then he decides to run for state senate. I told him, you're not going to win. It's not going to happen. But what he did was, which I thought was interesting, for people who identified so much as Democrats, he turned over so many people because of him. Now, that's an individual, a charisma thing. But if you have somebody that understands the candidate, and the candidate understands them and talks the same language, and I'm not just talking about language as in being Spanish, the same things that they're interested in, you get a tremendous number coming over. And in fact, he did that. Not enough for the Senate, but enough to, first of all, win the Board of Ed, enough to get everybody's attention there. Now they're working on it because it's quite interesting. The Dominicans, what people don't know is that the Dominican community, every year there are some campaigns in the Dominican Republic, and while we're not having any campaigns, they're having campaigns. And there's the PDR and the RNPP, there's two different groups, and they fight like crazy with each other because they have connections in the Dominican Republic where they can, Spanish is called botella, which means a bottle. What that really means is a job. And so they fight for that. So they are seasoned campaign workers that fight all the time with each other on politics for the island. And we haven't been able to do that yet in terms of flipping that over to help Republican candidates or the Republican cause, even though when you hear them talk, they sound very, very conservative. On immigration, they're not happy that the Haitians are coming into the Dominican Republic. They argue that we should let open borders here, but not there. It's quite interesting. Why should you have, welfare? You shouldn't have that, but they should have it here, but you shouldn't have it there. And it's quite interesting when you listen to them talk. So it's a problem for us. We need a lot more effort on the Republican Party to attract a lot of the Colombians and Dominicans community that we have here in New Jersey. I think over time it'll happen. Jose Aranco's done a good job of that. So anyway, I just thought that I'd give you some observation and whatever questions we'll go for.
I want to make an observation on something you said. I don't think Donald Trump is a conservative.
Oh,
And I'll tell you why I say this. I'm a conservative. I'm a Ronald Reagan conservative. Donald Trump is the antithesis of everything Ronald Reagan was. Ronald Reagan believed in free trade, cutting down tariffs as much as possible. Donald Trump is the ultimate high tariff, very much isolationist in terms of international trade. Ronald Reagan believed very strongly in respect for institutions. He respected the integrity and the independence of the FBI, for example, the Justice Department. Donald Trump is out to this is one of the reasons I became a never-Trumper. This is why I endorsed Hillary Clinton. I never would have dreamed that I would endorse Hillary Clinton for anything. And I supported her very strongly in 2016 because I saw him as a man who was out to destroy, and I was right, the integrity and independence of these institutions. Ronald Reagan was not a bigot, and this man has made the worst appeals to bigotry I have seen in my lifetime. Ronald Reagan was very much an internationalist in foreign affairs, and this man is America first. What Donald Trump has done is he is basically, I recently, and I got a lot of flack for this, and I got a lot of support for this. I talked about his practice in my article in the Star Ledger Sunday. He actually is practicing a lot of things that are downright fascistic. That was not Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan believed in limited government. He believed in inclusiveness. Now, people could disagree with him. And the other thing, the one mistake I think Reagan made that I've said down through the years, I thought he did the right thing when he cut the tax rate from 70 to 50%. But I'm a deficit hawk also. That's where I take after Dwight Eisenhower, who believed, I'm more of an Eisenhower Republican than anything else, but Eisenhower believed that any tax cut you would have to pay for, and you'd have to have commensurate cuts in spending. But this tax cut that Trump has done is catastrophic. It really is. To live with $1 trillion deficit, you will either have the monetization of the deficit, which will lead to inflation, or else you're going to have interest rates that are off the charts. And we see signs of foreboding that in the Wall Street Journal right now and the stock market right now. And the final thing is on immigration. Everyone forgets the Wall Street Journal, which was the real mouthpiece of Reaganism in the 1980s. The Wall Street Journal was for open borders then. You know, with vetting, I'm an open borders person, which shocks people, but I believe in vetting. But I had a lot of my family that was condemned to death in Poland during the Holocaust because they couldn't get here. And immigration, I get very emotional about the subject. But Ronald Reagan was basically an open borders person. And back then, all the business organizations wanted it because it was a source of workers. This is something, that Trump worked on, the xenophobia of people. So you've had a person who really is more a set of attitudes than a set of philosophies. And that's why I think the biggest problem the Republican Party will have, they've got, when I left the Republican Party, I said, I'm not going to become a Democrat. I don't agree with there are Democrats I've supported. There are Republicans I've supported. But the Republicans have to get a new message. They don't have a message right now. And unless they get one, I want a strong Republican. Even though I've left the party, I want a strong Republican Party. I want competition.
I think one of the interesting things to see, though, Alan, will be whether they need to craft that message, because there's actually a lot of potential good news, for an incumbent president. Unemployment is low, the economy is doing well, and in other parts of the country, and even in parts of New Jersey. We keep coming back to the Sherrill district. I can speak to that a little bit more. But if you look at District 11, which the numbers favor a Republican candidate in a congressional race there, Trump carried that district. Hillary carried it by a point. Phil Murphy carried it by a point. It hadn't been represented by a Democrat in Congress in 30 years. And there was tremendous grassroots activism because of Trump, which propelled the candidate to victory. But the candidate's message was not about Trump. The candidate's message was much more middle of the road, right? It was much more centrist.
That's how she got Republican support.
Right, that's how she got Republican. That's my point. So the challenge for the Democratic Party as we go into 2020 is how to square those two things, because you have to keep part of that base highly motivated in order to win, and that base wants to say Trump's got to go, investigation, right, all that kind of. But in order to win in some of these other places that we were talking about in other parts of the country, and it's amazing to me to see, like, Trump's numbers haven't dropped among his core base in other parts of, like, so you're saying there's problems in the Republican Party. What I see is a person who's still very popular within the base of his party. I don't see anything to me nationally that says he's lost, which is shocking to me, because I do believe that he's a racist and that he is the most unqualified person to ever hold the office in the history.
I knew we'd reach agreement on
something. So we agree on that. But I guess my point is, and there are probably some, and you can disagree with that, but I guess what I'm saying is we haven't seen that loss of support. Two of the other, and I'll finish on that. Two of the other candidates who beat Tom Malinowski in District 7, who beat a centrist Republican in Leonard Lance, but it's a little bit of district that favors the Democrats a little bit more. It's by and large a suburban district, in the central portion of the state. However, Lance ran, which was interesting in that race was Lance ran on a very similar message to Sherrill. He ran on I'm a centrist, I can work with both sides, I want to produce results for my district. That message, though, did not resonate because people said, no, we don't want that. We want someone we believe who will be able to stand up to the president, versus a Democrat who ran in an open seat right in District 11, who really didn't run on the idea of standing up to the president. She ran on the idea of that our district deserves better representation, and that this person's the person I'm running against, in Jay Weber, is too extreme for the district. So I'm interested to see how we're going to figure that piece of it out, as we move forward. And I know you think that the Republicans are bigger trouble, and it's funny coming from the Democrat. I'm not as optimistic that the Republicans are as in much trouble as you think they are as we head into 2020.
I think the Democrats are in trouble too, because you've got your problem. This is not a problem with you. And Mike and Sherrill's perfect this way.
Right.
Your progressive Democrats are a big problem, and I'll tell you where they're a problem. I've been active in Jewish politics my whole life. In the Jewish community, there are genuine fears of the progressive Democrats on Israel. And this is something that, I'm in the Orthodox community, and the attitudes of the Orthodox community are somewhat different than the rest of the Jewish community. I'm the most anti-Trump person you find in the Orthodox community. I get a lot fewer lunch invitations anymore. And this is a big problem. It's a big problem because of the progressives. So neither party is home free, but the base you talk about for Donald Trump, you're right, he continues to get that, but it's a declining base. It can't win with just that base. And if you look at the national popular vote in this election for Democrat and Republican House candidates, Democrats won going away. It was as big a vote as the Republicans got in 2010 for House candidates. So neither party is home free, and both parties are going to benefit from the problems the other has.
Agree, but I guess what I'm suggesting is that we as in my opinion, the Democratic Party has to be careful about just relying on the so-called Obama coalition. Meaning there was an idea after 2008 that if you got certain numbers with younger voters, with women voters, with Latino and African American voters, that coalition would always be enough from a national standpoint to win an election. And we took substantial losses, right, in 2020. I mean, it was only less than 70,000 votes across 3 states, as you pointed out, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. However, we as a party dropped significantly among a group of voters who, for whatever reason, and I'm not going to just say that that this was because of racism or whatever. I'm going to say there was a group of voters out there that did not feel, because of that over-focus sometimes on just potentially constituency group outreach and coalition building, that they had any place in that coalition. And what I think that I don't see the progressives as the challenge. I see the challenge for the Democrats to get a piece of that, meaning that being that the people who felt that they were also left behind and that the Democratic Party message didn't speak to them. And that's the challenge that we have as we move into 2020.
Like the book Hillbilly Elegy, that's an example.
Well, I mean, if you've read to a certain extent, I would just say the challenging campaigns, if you constantly just talk about different constituencies, is that eventually people don't potentially understand where they fit in among those constituencies.
I agree.
Right. So my wife is Colombian. My kids are and I look at my kids as an example. I mean, I'm Irish. My wife's Colombian, but they're going to identify with 2 different cultures, but they're going to identify really as Americans. That's right. Right. And where do they fit in to that kind of messaging? So.
A couple of things. Well, first of all, I always joke around with my friends. I say, look, especially my friends who are Democrats, because I have a lot of them. So Trump is a Democrat. He's a New York Democrat, so don't give me a hard time, okay? He just hijacked our party. That's the one thing. But you got to give him credit for something. This guy knows how to manipulate the issue, and he knows how to move people around. And, he's got the Democrats going crazy because he's moving on so many, they can't catch up with him. So to that, I mean, for all of his problems, this guy knows how to manipulate the issues. The voter access was one thing you made me think about this, Brendan. And I know I had talked to some people in the past. Why don't they should be doing online voting. There's something that they should be doing. The vote by mail is nice, but I don't trust the mail anyway, but it's a problem. And things get lost, and I don't know how many other things. Why can't you want to get young people involved? They could just go online, do their stuff, and that's it. And you'll have a lot more. Now, what will happen from that? I'm not so sure 100% it'll be Democrat, because when you hear some of these younger kids, they sound a lot more conservative. What was that? Well, that's true. That could be. So then you got to look. I think we're the greatest country. Not to sound like Trump, but the greatest country in the world that we could do things with technology. Online, I think will be open up the doors for everybody. And I think it'll be a tremendous move. And there are some states that have done this.
Yes.
So we are always, New Jersey is so far behind, and we're really at the center of the world, right? New York. And I don't know why we can't do that, but that would access.
I would just say quickly, I mean, we'd love to turn it over to some questions in the audience, but that's part of. I think that's definitely being talked about. In Trenton right now. Probably the first step. I mean, there's clearly the issue of security, election security, which is a big one right now. In New Jersey, we still have counties that don't have paper verified ballots. which is to me outrageous that we don't have a system to verify that you actually voted still in 2018. And secondly, I think the first step before we get to online voting would be to open up voting centers in advance of Election Day, right? Like a very basic step that this state should be able to take, and some counties did that this year, would be to have locations where you could very simply drop off your ballot. You know, I mean, this isn't for millennials, and hopefully people will plug into this issue. I mean, the whole, in my personal opinion, like the whole idea that we have this election on a Tuesday still, you know, it's crazy. Like, I mean, the fact that we still exercise our democracy in the same way that we did 150 years ago, to me, needs to be looked at. Access needs to be looked at. I mean, I'm probably more, this is where my Montclair roots come in, probably more center left on this issue. I mean, I think we should be voting on a Saturday or on some type of national I mean, there's all types of things I think we should be doing, right, to increase access.
Don't make it Saturday. I can't
Right, I'm sorry, maybe not a Saturday, right? But you know, some kind of holiday. You're right. There's some kind of day that we recognize. I'll give you the quick story. In Montclair, it wasn't until this year, because of the public safety concerns, all of our polling locations are in schools, and the Montclair Public Schools for the last 35 years have been in session on Election Day. You know, and it wasn't until we live in, unfortunately, the world that we live in now, where some folks finally said, well, you know, we have hundreds of people walking in. You know, if I go to visit my son, right, I can't walk in the front door without being cleared, without going through some kind of security. And we had hundreds of people who were unregulated walking into these buildings each day. That's what actually prompted the schools to be closed this year for the first time in the history of the district. I use that to say that there are things like that, that are simply can be done to improve access.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to open it to the audience now for questions, but we want to have a rule. Please just ask a question. Don't make your speeches. We'll get to that later. Let's get everybody a chance to get their questions answered. So, are you first? Yes.
Okay, big picture. I'm interested in knowing what the three speakers perceive as the function of the Republican Party these days, given the behavior of Mitch McConnell, the behavior of many of the cabinet members, the absence of oversight, the absence of the responsible Judiciary Committee. What does the Republican Party stand for anymore?
On the issue of judges, there's a difference between Mitch McConnell looking like the strong-arm person and a Republican who really believes, I know most of you won't agree with this, that we live in a democracy, in the idea that judges should limit their opinions to interpreting the law rather than legislating from the bench. There are people in the past, for example, I'm going to mention a name that I admired very much, and many of you may want to throw me out because of this. I admired Robert Bork a lot because Robert Bork was a traditional conservative who didn't seem threatening to people. He certainly didn't seem to be racist. He seemed sensitive to everybody. People could agree or disagree, but the Republicans, that part of the Republican message, by the way, I still agree with. For example, I feel that on the issue of, I wrote an article a few years ago where I advocated that states had the right to permit same-sex marriage. It was very well received by the LGBT community, especially a Republican writing this article. But I said I did have some concern about it being legislated by the court because I didn't see anything in the Constitution on that issue. So if you believe, as I do, that courts should not legislate from the bench, there's a way of saying that without sounding like a racist and without being strong-armed and also without seeming to be sexist, and that's how the Republicans came over. I agree with you on that. I think that they need better messengers. They don't have there are good Republican messengers in the Senate, but nobody's heard of them. For example, Ben Sasse, he's a very good conservative. William F. Buckley was a very good messenger because he repudiated racism and he got his message out. He's the reason I became a Republican. But, In the era of Donald Trump, it's all a message of clout and demagoguery. I think that he is discouraging real intellectuals from coming forward and making the case, because he himself, except on the judges, is not a conservative. That's a big problem. I couldn't agree with you more. I'm disgusted with the lack of oversight. Look, I've been screaming about the way they've treated Mueller. I've been screaming about, I'm talking to a wall on this stuff. But unfortunately, the Republicans used to have people who believed in oversight when, during Watergate, you had heroic Republicans. Barry Goldwater was a strong believer in oversight, and Ronald Reagan was one of the first to come out for impeachment. But unfortunately, Donald Trump has intimidated all these people. Why? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I know you're not satisfied with my answer, but it's a sad state of affairs.
Anybody else?
What do you guys think?
I agree with Alan. I think the Republican Party, the leadership is, they've got their hands tied with dealing with Donald Trump. They're afraid of making any kind of a move for fear of alienating their voters. Then you have some of these senators who want to stay as a Republican Party establishment, and unfortunately, that's not going to work for them. So they're being I agree with you. They're being intimidated by him and the entire thing that's happening. So there's not much they're going to be able to do.
Mr. Gill, what do you think?
I'm not, I agree with Alan. I'm not sure what the party stands for. This, I'm a believer that the Republican Party through the Obama presidency is what helped produce Donald Trump. If you remember in 2008, after President Obama was first elected, Senator McConnell said the number one legislative priority of the Republican Party is to make Barack Obama a one-term president. And at that point in time, and then went on to question, folks in the Republican Party questioned his citizenship for 8 straight years, and shout "you're a liar" during the State of the Union. This is all what led up to the creation of someone like Donald Trump. Because I'm not disappointed, because I didn't expect them to. I'm not disappointed that there's not Republicans now who are standing up to Donald Trump, because they didn't stand up to these things that were wrong back then. Some of that was wrong. So their party, it's funny, people compare, they say, that there's too much polarization in politics in America. That's one of the biggest lies that's been perpetrated on the American public. The far left has much less influence on the Democratic Party than the far right does on the Republican Party. It's not a polarized situation. It is one party is controlled by the extreme wing of their party. The Democratic Party doesn't have that right now. So if you look at someone like Congressman Frelinghuysen, who retired, who was the chair of the Appropriations Committee. He was the chair of the Appropriations Committee. His committee could have funded the Gateway Tunnel project. He was the key to the funding for the Gateway Tunnel project. And because he couldn't deal with President Trump, and he couldn't stand up to President Trump, because the far right wing of his party in the House said, if you do that, your chairmanship is gone. Your chairmanship is gone. And you know what he decided to do? He retired. He retired.
I agree with Brenda. I'm sorry. Keep
I was just going to say, so the message, I think, has been pretty clear. I think what that party right now stands for, in my mind, is the far right of their constituency.
I wouldn't just define it as far right, though, for this reason. You used to have conservatives like Bob Dole, who believed in compromise in the process. You used to have people like Everett McKinley Dirksen, one of the greatest senators in American history, who worked with Lyndon Johnson to get the Civil Rights Bill passed in 1964. These were conservatives, but the difference was that, as ideological as they may have been, they were willing to work. They believed in a process. What you have now is this ethic. I blame Newt Gingrich for a lot of this. You have this ethic. We want to destroy people. I'll translate it to Trenton. I was on the legislative staff with Chuck Hytine. We used to go drinking with the Democrats every week. We had a ball. We'd bust each other's chops. I don't see that in Trenton anymore. You know, I think Christie had a lot to do with that, but I used to see in Washington, Hubert Humphrey used to stand up in the Senate, and he used to say Barry Goldwater is from 18th century Fox. And Barry Goldwater would say, Hubert, you've been vaccinated with a phonograph needle. And they'd go across the street. They ran against each other. They socialized. Tom Kane once put it to me like this. He said when he was, his dad was one of the greatest members of the House of Representatives history. He said, we all lived in Washington. We were neighbors with the Democrats. We went to the same birthday parties. Nowadays, a lot of times they're not living down there, and it's become a bitter blood sport. It's not just ideology, it's the nature of business.
I know we have more questions to go through. I think that's right. Just to finally say on the first question of what does the Republican Party stands for, I'm not sure because there have been so many principled Republicans who have, I believe, sold their souls in their support of President Trump. And what I mean when I say that is that they're willing to accept all this other, what I would call the craziness of Trump, the tweets and the outrageous things that he says and the blatant racism and that comes from his office, because in that pursuit of power, they were willing to do that. And many principled, I would put Paul Ryan in that category. I disagree with Paul Ryan, but Paul Ryan had a principled position. He sacrificed that standing in his support of the president, and I'm not sure then what the party long-term stands for. All that being said, I'm not sure you have to stand for something in order to win the election in 2020.
Okay, everybody raise your hand so I have an idea of questions. Okay, how about over here
That's good.
It's good, yeah.
on the aisle?
Hi. You talked about the problem of how we vote, but what do you guys think about how we count the votes or the Electoral College?
I couldn't hear that. Couldn't hear what.
I happen to believe that the Electoral College should remain, and it's not because I benefited from that, because George Bush, for whom I served, was elected with a minority of the popular vote, but he received an electoral vote majority. And I can see how my view would be easily disputed, but I'll tell you what the Electoral College does. We are, as a nation, we're also a union of states, and that's the basis of our Constitution. What the Electoral College does is it forces candidates to really go all over the country and to speak to different groups and try to, and as George Will once said, what the Electoral College does, it improves the character of the majorities that you're getting. Otherwise, for example, a candidate could just go, and I wanted Hillary Clinton, so I'm not saying this is an attack on her. A candidate could just go to California and New York and just get all the votes there and largely ignore the rest of the country. So the Electoral College wasn't founded for that reason. It was basically a compromise between the large and small states back in 1787. But I think it's come to serve that function. And it also, if it's going to be on the basis of popular votes, you may have some national recounts. You could, Nixon, and I'll tell you something about Nixon and Kennedy. I always felt the Kennedy's people stole that 1960 election. And the reason I felt that way, it's very interesting what the Democrats did in their 64 convention. Alabama had 11 electoral votes. 6 of them went for Kennedy, 5 of them went to unpledged electors who voted for Harry Byrd. In terms of the convention, they counted those votes from Alabama for Democrats as only 6/11 of a vote. So if you took it that way, Nixon got the larger popular vote. So I think the Electoral College also, if you could have had a recount in that election that would have lasted for, especially back then, for half a year. And the fact that there was an electoral, and this was Nixon at his best. Nixon at his worst was horrible, but Nixon decided after the election, they were pushing him for a recount. Thurston Morton, the national Republican chair, was, even Eisenhower suggested that to him. He said, the nation isn't going to be able to stand it. And that's another convenience of the Electoral College.
Okay, we have a question over here. This gentleman in the middle there.
I have 2 observations about this past midterm. It was a blue wave. The 4 additional senators that were Republicans that won. There was 2.5% more total Democratic Senate votes On the House side, it was 6.1% of the nation, more Democratic votes, okay? So that was a wave. More people voted for Democrats, period, done and finished. Number two.
You have to have a
Oh,
question,
second-
sir.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
That was a good observation.
Second thing was, I had a question on the in the Texas senatorial race. They were moaning and groaning that Beto O'Rourke did so well because he had the support of small donors. When are we going to change how we fund elections so that it limits the amount, how much people can put into the election, how much corporations could have put in, so you have the people supporting the candidate they want? Because if it went by small donors, the Democrats would have cleaned up across the board.
Did you hear
I hope
his
there's a
que- Did you
change
hear?
coming.
I have a very controversial view on that, and I'll tell you why. I was a great admirer of Eugene McCarthy, who I think his success in 1968 changed America for the better. If you had had campaign finance laws that limited contributions in effect then the way they later were, his campaign never would have gotten off the ground. He benefited because back then people could give whatever they want and there was no limitation. So there was a man named Stuart Mott. He was an heir to the General Motors Corporation stock. He gave McCarthy a fortune. And as a result of that, McCarthy had a functioning campaign. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gotten anywhere. So there's a bad side to campaign finance limitations also. There's a new cast of power in this country, the people who have the Rolodexes. And a lot of times these people are somewhat distant from the grassroots. So I have favored a reform that nobody will like, and I don't blame them, okay? I think the important thing is that the public be aware of who's giving what. I favor full disclosure. I think that all contributions should go through a central source. In New Jersey races, let it all go through some Department of State in Trenton. Let all contributions be disclosed within 24 hours, but let everybody give whatever they want, be it a small person, a wealthy person. Let them give what they want and let the public make the decision as to whether these contributions have corrupted a candidate. Because otherwise, what you see nowadays is independent people who are poor can't run for office. Eugene McCarthy was not a wealthy man. He could not have run against the Kennedys, Bobby Kennedy then, if it hadn't been for Stuart Mott and his contribution. That contribution would be illegal today.
Anybody?
I think he could have run better.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on that issue here?
He's
The
covered
table?
what I think too.
Okay. All right. Next. Okay. Let's see. Let's go down here and take a female. Is it not? Is it on?
Hi, okay. I actually have a question about how many people in the country have personally benefited from Trump and the Republican agenda. We hear all the time that elections are basically people vote based on kitchen table issues. So how many people have actually voted or been personally impacted in a positive way by the Trump administration and the current agenda?
I think he takes credit for an economy that he doesn't deserve credit for. It was already improving when Obama was a person. I was not an Obama person, believe me, but he did a very good job on the economy. And Trump is basically a continuation of that economy. He could ruin the economy with these tariffs and with the tax hike. And the tax cut, excuse me. Yeah, I agree with you on that. No, but I'm telling you, people don't vote for Trump because they think they benefit. He addresses their emotional needs. He's phenomenal. He's the greatest demagogue. I mean, I watch these rallies, and people kill me for saying this. I think I'm watching Nuremberg sometimes. When I hear him say, knock him out, and I see an African American sitting there, and someone goes up and slugs him, it scares the hell out of me. I'm sorry.
I think.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there's a great book, What's the Matter with Kansas, which I highly recommend. I mean, it talks specifically about this issue and about how how people vote against their interests on a regular on a regular basis. So, you know,
They have a Democrat governor now.
they do. But it goes to, you know, how people perceive the leadership, how people feel about and make that connection, and oftentimes do not support, you know, candidates who necessarily are on their issues.
I have, you know, between client, I mean, I'm at the school here, but I also have a law practice, and I deal with wealthy people, and I deal with people not so wealthy. But I could tell you this, that including myself, I have seen my retirement accounts, my investments, others, I mean, I can't mention clients, but I've seen them benefit from these tax laws. And I know people are not going to be happy about that, but that I have seen myself. And I think if you are in a company and you're putting money in a retirement account, you see that has grown. And that has happened over the last 2 years. But yeah, but when you're investing, you're putting money away for yourself in a retirement account, and that's being distributed throughout the economy in companies, you're going to benefit for that. You're going to have a retirement account later. Now, the people who don't put money in a retirement account, that's a problem for them. Well, if you have to retire in the next year, you don't put it in the stock market. But if you're going to be retiring in 10 or 15 or 20 years, whatever happens the next year, so it doesn't matter. We've gone through 2008, right, which everybody wants to blame on Bush. And Obama only wants to take the good stuff, right? Like Clinton wanted to take all the credit for Reagan, right? I know, I'm not debating with you. What I'm trying to tell you is that over the long haul, it doesn't matter. If you look at the way the stock market is, it goes up. So there is benefit right now. As an immediate benefit, the tax cuts that were happened, or the tax laws that were put in there, actually open up that window to bring in tremendous amount of monies that were sitting outside the country. During the 2016 campaign, that was the first time I said to myself, this guy has got something here. What he said was something like this: why don't we open up the door, let him come in, and then close the door? Because there was so much money of so many corporations outside of this country that was not being invested here. I don't think that the way it's going to go for the next 2 years is going to make really much of a difference. They're going to be fighting with each other, the House and the Senate. They didn't get a chance to change. Oh, for all the talk they did, they didn't change the what's called Obamacare, and now they're not going to be able to do that either. So they'll just keep fighting, and that's, I think, is going to happen for the next 2 years until 2020 is decided whether Trump becomes president again, or they have somebody that'll come out pretty good on the Democrat side. But if the Senate again is still a Republican Senate, I don't think you're going to get much help there.
Okay.
Hey, let Brennan.
Okay.
It's your guys, you know.
Okay, this gentleman over here needs a turn.
They let you off the hook.
And then we'll take one more question.
A Republican cry years ago used to be starve the beast. Now the Republicans are starving the beast. It's a frightening scenario ahead if they continue in this process, because when we really do have financial crises, we'll already have such a severe deficit. You know, I don't have to explain that to you guys. So this is going on in the federal government. What's the resolution of this, or a solution for this? And we in New Jersey have a Democratic government, and yet we're starving the beast also.
Well, you have a balanced budget requirement in the laws in New Jersey.
Right,
okay?
I know, all the states do.
That I have for years complained about both parties in the federal government, because both parties are phony on this. With the Democrats, you have deficits due to what I think is excessive spending. With Republicans, you have deficits due to excessive tax cuts. And I think the Trump tax cut was a catastrophe. But I think that this is where Republicans are going to run into trouble. Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid. Look, my mother, rest her soul, the last 2 years of her life benefited from Medicaid, because in Florida, you know, she was running out of funds. I was administering everything. We were able to qualify her under Medicaid. And Medicaid has become a middle-class entitlement. And for that reason, if the Republicans try to starve the beast, they're going to starve themselves, because people are dependent on Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. And you know, when Mitch McConnell, he almost he did blow the whole thing in a lot of ways when he made the statements towards the end, well, the way to resolve the deficit is to cut these programs. And the Democrats were late in taking advantage of that, but it worked for them.
Anybody want to comment any further? No? Okay. Last question.
One thing the Democrats did right was run on Medicare and medicine in general, because I don't know how much money you made in the stock market in the last year. If you have an elderly parent or grandparent that has dementia or Alzheimer's, God forbid, or something like that, if there's no Medicaid, you're going to lose every nickel you made in the market, plus sell your house and everything else.
That's what I had. That was my mother.
You know.
I
So
did
the
too.
guy next to you can get wiped out. At a nursing home around here, without insurance, is $15,000 a month. How many months you going to live? 3 years? Thank you very much. We need Medicaid. We need Medicare. We need a stronger Social Security. You have to raise the limit on salary maybe to $250,000 to take care of the Social Security. It's not much.
Okay, thank
when you're
you.
making 500 grand or more, to pay a little more money, so that you have a safety net that's protected. That's
I want to thank our panelists. I think that we learned a lot tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your good questions.
Always good to see you, my friend.
Pleasure. And I'll follow up soon, right away.
Pleasure talking with you.